hopping on. Hope everybody's ready for the holidays. I'm sure everybody has their Christmas shopping done, completely ready, right? But we don't have too much on our agenda today, so I will go ahead and get started with our bead deployment update. So as everyone knows, if you were on the call last month, we discussed the data curing we've been doing with NTIA. We did wrap that up. As we discussed on the call, we did have to remove locations. We are now sitting at just under 74,000 locations. We are moving on to the cost curing portion, and we were prepared for that. They basically asked us for justifications for some of the higher cost locations. We've sent that off, and we are not anticipating any huge changes being made as we wrap up the curing, and are hoping again for that early January final approval from NTIA. There has still been some chatter about a cleanup round, nothing concrete still, but we are prepared to go ahead with that if we do end up getting concrete information about the cleanup round going ahead. There's nothing, or there is something on bead deployment. I'm going to let Brandon cover that in his legislative update, but does anybody have any questions just on the deployment technical update, questions, comments on that? And I didn't mention this, but we will have our GIS team. They are working to update the maps. They are waiting until the completion of curing just so they don't have to keep changing it over and over again. So once that's finalized and up on the website again, I will let everybody know. Yeah, Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, so you said the 74,000. It's my understanding is that 30,000 locations were taking off the bead map that were originally in the RFP that went out and was closed in August, right? So you started at, is that my understanding? It's about 110 and now you're down to 74 or something like that?
Yeah, so those are approximate numbers. Like you said, that's about where it is, but yeah, we're just under 74,000. I think it's 73,950 or something like that now.
So does everybody on the call understand the order of magnitude here? We got 30,000 locations or more that have been taken off the map that won't be deployed to.
And I'll just jump in and sort of clarify what's going on there. Essentially, we used a more recent data set than the NTIA allowed us to. Essentially, we used the most recent Fabric version. NTIA wanted us to use Fabric version 4, which is older data. And so we tried to fight to use the more recent data, which has those locations considered as unserved, which would have made them eligible for BEAD. And so they kicked that back to us. So essentially, that's where the sort of discrepancy lies, is in what we tried to do, like I said, which was use the most recent data because that's what we thought was the most accurate.
Right.
And then, so like I said, we're on the same page here, and we tried that. We submitted it multiple times that way, and like I said, they kicked it back enough times that basically it became, you have to go back to Fabric version 4. So
Yeah.
so that's what's happening here, and when Elizabeth was talking about the cleanup round, that is something that we've heard chatter about, like she said, from NTIA, and that cleanup round would address those locations and would allow us to use unexpended BEAD dollars. And since we saved so much in our subgrantee selection, we would have more than enough to cover those. So like I said, if they do end up moving forward with that plan, ending up allowing us to do that, then that would be the way that would be handled. But that's sort of where what caused this issue was a data discrepancy between us and NTIA.
Right. And my hat's off too for, like, you guys have done a tremendous job, but when the Florida Broadband office, they opened up their proposals, they had all these locations out there. They said, hey, if you're an ISP and you want to propose, you have to you have to apply and be able to serve all these locations. So that's what happened. That's what everybody has to understand. That's what happened in August. And so ISPs did apply. And I'm with representing Talkie, and we got an email in November that said 74% of your locations are taken away. That means 74% of the locations in Marion County that were going to be subject to BEAD are no longer subject to BEAD. So that's the order of magnitude is huge. Talkie isn't, we can't do the build because you need to have enough demand, enough locations to actually make it so that each location is under the threshold that the NTIA requires. So across the state, this is huge. I understand that there's some areas that have got like 93% of their locations removed. And so this is a very, problematic situations to actually the constituents, the residents that live in these locations that aren't going to get served because of this approach that NTIA is taking, is saying, hey, we want to use an older version of Fabric when Florida to use the best version that's out there. And it's just frustrating that they're going to require us to come back and do a cleanup round. And the problem with that cleanup round, and so everybody understands this on the call, is that, I even said to NTIA, I had a meeting with NTIA leadership because when we got the notice that, hey, 74% of your locations are going to be taken away, we didn't take that sitting down. We raised it. We went to the leadership of NTIA. I actually requested a meeting with Ariel Roth, but I got our second in command, Doug Kinkoff. And, they said, this is how it is. I said, why don't we just do it separately? Why don't we just have a follow-up round? It does the cleanup round and all together. That way we have all the locations and we can divide them by the total cost and get under the threshold. Now, the threshold for Florida is $7,500. If you're not under $7,500, it gets kicked back and probably is going to go to Starlink. So the folks right now in Marion County that were subject to those 74% are probably going to be subject to getting Starlink instead of getting some super fast fiber service like with gig or 10 gig up and down to the home or business. So it's very troubling that this happened, and it's happened across the state. So Marion County is the only place. Every county, to some degree, probably got impacted by this, some more than others. But it's a problem because even if they do a cleanup round, it's going to be difficult to get fiber and get you the best possible service to your constituents within Florida. So that's the problem that's here. And Talkie's really upset about it. We spent a lot of money with our applications and looking into this, and the Fabric locations to just go up in smoke in an email was very troubling to us. And I want to make sure that everybody on this call understands the order of magnitude and how it's impacting Florida. I'm a Florida grad. I went to University of Florida. I went to Stetson University College of Law. I worked at United Telephone of Florida. I worked in Apopka. I worked in Tampa. I worked in Miami. I worked there right after Hurricane Andrew. I know Florida. I love Florida. And this, to me, was a big slap in the face by NTIA. Just being straightforward. Maybe Florida Broadband Office can't say that. But to me, it was just very upsetting. It was upsetting how they looked at Florida and they said, well, we look at the data, and Florida looked at the best data. Staff did a great job in the Florida Broadband Office. So it's just very troubling to me. But I wanted to raise that with everybody on the call so they understand that this is not the program that the Florida Broadband Office envisioned in August and the locations that they were going to cover. This has been changed dramatically by NTIA. Does anybody have questions about this? I mean, that they want to talk more about?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
My question is this obviously you guys were using the best data available. Did they give a reason why they were using that? Was it process oriented, or did they say, hey, this latest version is not fully vetted or verified or something? Did they say that something about that data? And then the second question I have is there a way you can provide us contrasting between the two versions for our counties? I'm a LPT guy. I would like to see that, because I would maybe engage my federal delegation and my federal lobbyists to look into this issue more if I can understand the impact to my county.
Thanks,
Hey,
Craig.
Jacob, I'll be happy to take that for you.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so this was sort of a line in the sand kind of thing, right? When we first did our challenge process, it was all predicated on Fabric version 4, with the MDC that's associated with that Fabric. So in order to compare apples to apples, they wouldn't allow us to use future versions, not only of the Fabric, but of the MDC. They did tell us that we could true up our locations based on the latest Fabric, but we couldn't add any locations. So we did that. And when we submitted it back to them, they said, no, these locations were different on your Fabric 4, or they didn't exist in your Fabric 4, or they were considered served in Fabric 4. And that 30,000 number that Phil had talked about earlier was 31,000 and change that they tried to remove from our proposal. We were able to win 3,000 of those because they were considered served by us under our previous grant programs. And as a matter of attrition, as those projects move forward, we recognize that those 3,000 locations were not going to get served by our grants under the Broadband Opportunity and Capital Projects Fund. So they relented and gave us those 3,000 back. The other 28,000 locations are consistent of 17,000 plus of those locations are erroneous reporting by the ISPs. They had reported locations served, and in the newer Fabric, they were no longer served, so that was an error in reporting. That's 17,000 of those 28,000 locations. And the remaining 10,000 was a difference in locations between Fabric 4 and Fabric 6, which is the Fabric we use to true up to. So we certainly hope that we have the opportunity to get to a cleanup round. It's not the ideal situation because a lot of these projects that were consisted of some of those locations that got removed would have been completed far more economically than independently. So we're hoping that we can put together locations, if we're given the opportunity to put together project areas that will more or less encompass all of those 28,000 remaining locations. In addition to that, we're going to fight for the fact that we use the latest MDC and Fabric version 7, because if you look at Fabric version 7 versus 6, there's almost an additional 20,000 locations in that Fabric in Florida that are unserved. So through the latest MDC and Fabric 7, Florida has around 49,000 locations that will remain unserved after we do our first round in provisional in the BEAD program. So we have a lot of skin in the game. We're going to do the best we can to fight to get those locations. We've already worked out some of we know how many there are out there based on the latest Fabric and MDC. And we're going to try to fashion project areas in advance of any opportunity to do cleanup rounds so that we have our tools ready to go. And as soon as they allow us to do it, if they allow us to do it, we'll be able to put those out there pretty quickly.
Yeah,
so that's in a nutshell how we,
seems like
that's how we got there.
It seems like it behoove you to definitely nail that down before you do a procurement. It seems like the feds are nationwide. This is probably, if they apply this nationwide, the impact is astronomical, it sounds like, but it sounds like they're treating it in a process or common sense.
And
Yeah,
Chris,
we just have to make sure that between us and NTIA, we're on the same page. And is with the changing Fabric and the changing MDC, there's no such thing as putting a line in the sand. These locations and their service change on a day-to-day basis. So to just preclude locations because they weren't included in a certain Fabric is kind of ludicrous. You're still going to end up with having locations that are unserved, even if you do the best you can. So we're going to do what we can to make sure that we have that moving goalpost, so that if we come across an area that's unserved in a location that we've already got a provider, that we just ask that provider to serve those locations. If we need to adjust the funding, we can do so. But that's our thought process as we are right now.
Yeah, and Paul, you've done an outstanding job, and your team, Elizabeth, Jacob, everybody has done an outstanding job. So this is just it's a curveball, but the reality is that you can say, hey, we're going to include the locations later, but if we can justify a fiber bill to get people the best possible fiber-based service, it's the highest speed and the lowest cost typically, we need to have all those locations in one round so we can divide the total cost of the construction by those total locations and get under the 7,500. So what happens is if you feed this through different rounds, then all of a sudden you're just justifying. It may not justify a fiber build, it may justify LEO, and that's about it. And that's, that to me is not the fiber. That's not the fast and high speed fiber that, the Florida it deserves. It deserves far better speeds, because this cleanup round thing doesn't fix the problem. It just, it just fixes makes a correction and adds to ELEO rather than addressing that now. And so that's a huge issue. And I know that Florida is working to close out their program, but just yesterday, the GAO announced that it had a big issue with this BEAD program. It wasn't subject to congressional review. That's a huge issue. It's called the Congressional Review Act. Congress needed to review what they did in June, and that may require that NTIA pump the brakes on any grants that it has not approved already, and may have to, slow the roll down on the grants that it had approved just recently. So, and straight awards just recently. So there may be an opportunity. This is a moving train right now, and honestly, every day you just don't know what's coming. This dropped out of nowhere, and the Congressional Review Act is a serious issue because it was a handful of people that made the decision on the new requirements, and the rule that we're talking about right now came out of that June 6th write-up, which was, it was an interpretation. Florida interpreted it the right way, the way I believe it should have been interpreted, and NTIA has a more constrained rule interpretation. But this announcement that came out with their BEAD policy change that prompted the whole RFP and the BEAD application process. It's interesting, but this announces Congressional Review Act. I don't know how it's going to impact, but it's going to, I think NTIA is going to be slow rolling everything at this point in time until it gets its arms around this, because it has to reconcile that shortcoming before it moves forward. Otherwise, there's challenge to any decision or any award unless it gets that nod from CRA. So to me, I just think we're just in a state of unknown at this point in time. But Paul, I welcome your thoughts, because this just happened. This happened. This is like within 24 hours, 48 hours that they announced this. GAO released this report, pulled the curtains back, and it's stunning everybody, because the BEAD saga continues, which has been a long saga over many years, and this just happens to be the next chapter, and it's a good grief moment, to be perfectly honest. That's what I posted on LinkedIn, because it just hasn't stopped. But I welcome the broadband office's thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm well aware of the changes that were made on June 6th. Also paying attention to what's going on in Congress and with the GAO latest ruling. Not sure how that's going to play out. All of our counterparts in other states have the, oh my God, here we go again, right? Are we going to slow this thing down one more time to figure out if we got to redo the rounds that we've already done? Nobody knows how that's going to be. I've been on this train since the inception, and it feels more like a roller coaster than a train. It's a white knuckle ride.
Isn't that right?
So we just kind of hang on and adapt and move forward as we can. So yes, we are up to snuff on all of the things that go on in Washington, some of which we initially thought were good that turned bad. But it is what it is, and we still have to serve the public, and we're going to do the best we can to get them the best service they possibly can as quickly as we can. So we pay attention to all of that stuff, Philip. None of that stuff happens in a bubble.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. But maybe there's an opportunity here when this happens to revisit this issue with the cleanup rounds and just have it one round instead of cleanup rounds. I don't know if I'm just, maybe that's a Hail Mary on my part and a prayer on my part, but that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, so we're prepared to do that if that's the case. But I don't read anything into the tea leaves that come out of Washington. We just kind of keep moving forward with the rules that are in place today. And if we can find our way to do a single round again, then that's what we'll do. Nothing's final until those provisional turn into actual awards and we have agreements out in the field. So if we have a chance to change things as we move along, I'd like to do it with as little disruption to those folks that are already awarded. But they are provisional, right? You found that out yourself. So
yep.
It is what it is. We got to deal with the rules on the ground as we move forward. So we are absolutely aware of everything that occurs with this program, regardless of where it happens, and we'll move forward accordingly.
That sounds great. Thanks, Paul. Just trying to see if we can turn these lemons into lemonade via these latest developments with GAO. So thanks. Appreciate the update.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And to address Craig, you had asked about getting a comparison of, what the locations were and what they are now in the counties. Well, that's something we'd be happy to provide you guys. I'll talk to leadership and see, just based on where we're at in curing, if we want to go ahead and do that now or wait just to have a better sense of things, so we don't give you a, well, here's the updated number, but we'd be happy to get that to you guys.
That would be awesome. Not only what I talked about before, but it would help explain it to my board and also explain it to residents and show, yeah, you just happen to fall in this area and this is why you're not getting whatever. So,
Yeah,
because we'll get those calls too.
certainly.
so
And I
much.
mean, yeah, of course. Like Paul and Jacob have both said, obviously we've gone back and forth toe to toe with NTIA, but definitely appreciate the support that we get from LTPTs in advocating and spreading awareness for these sorts of issues. So,
Right.
David, you have your hand raised.
I'm not sure why. Doesn't show it on my end, but thank you for acknowledging me.
Oh, you're good. We have another David on the call now. You have
Oh, sorry,
competition.
wrong David.
You're good. I don't
I'm
think
so
I
used
don't
to me
think
talking that I just started. So thank you very much.
well, that's okay. Feel free to add anything. David Malfara, I'm not sure your mic is working. But we can circle back, just start speaking if it is. Does anybody else have any questions, comments they would like to add to the discussion? Yeah, Ethan, go ahead.
I just have a more simple question. So now that Beads has, so obviously we're adding, Starlink and, and the Amazon, do current locations that have Starlink, are they considered served now? I just thought about this. Or we still consider them unserved?
So the policy hasn't changed, right? They're still considered unserved.
Okay.
And if they were included in our BEAD uh, proposals as unserved and are going to get fiber at this point in time, I don't know if there are any that are in that category, but if they were on our BEAD list, they were provided and they were a provisional award that was given to either fiber or wireless, or it may have been actually ended up back to Starlink or to Amazon. Whatever was eligible remained eligible. None of those changed. We considered all low Earth orbit satellites ineligible when we started this program, and they were all still ineligible.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought about that a little bit ago of like, oh, has that changed?
So welcome to my world.
That's good to hear. Yeah. Yeah. Real fun.
David Palmer.
I did raise my hand this time. Do we have a breakdown of those locations by county? I got in a couple minutes late. My apologies. It may have been addressed before I got in.
You're good. You're good. We can get that to you guys. Craig had mentioned that as well, and I saw Kyle also commented in the chat that it would, be helpful to give you guys a better view of where things are at right now. So yes, we will get that to everyone.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
GIS team is working on a lot of this stuff right now. We've had a lot of curing stuff. We had to go back and forth with NTIA, so they've been very busy with all that. But we'll have something similar to what we had in terms of our beat tracker as before, now that they've got their hands a little freer.
Alrighty, David Malfar, you still have your hand raised, but I'm not sure your mic is working, so feel free to put things in the chat. But does anybody else have any further questions, comments on bead deployment? Alrighty, well, I will go ahead and turn it over to Brandon for a broadband legislative update.
Thank you. And I hope everyone will have a happy holidays in the next few couple of weeks. Let's go ahead and talk about some policy and the political atmosphere that's happening right now. So on December 4th, Governor Ron DeSantis announced a policy proposals to establish consumer protections and regulatory rails for AI technologies and data centers. Key provisions include deepfake protections, a ban on foreign AI, NIL consent, AI disclosures on mental health restrictions, parental controls, data privacy, just a general consumer rights on AI. Now, the reason this is relevant is because on December 11th, President Trump enacted executive order, which let me go ahead and.
Oh, Brendan, you're mute. You're muted.
Oh, that's weird. Well, it wasn't muted the whole time, just then, right? All right. So I'm going to put some links real quick. So the first one is the governor's proposal announcement, and the second one is the executive order if you want to get a closer look on it. But the executive order kind of establishes a national AI standard and it directs the formation of like an AI litigation task force and mandates evaluation of state AI laws. The executive order also will specify that within 90 days, the Secretary of Commerce must issue a policy notice outlining the conditions under which states may be eligible for the remaining feed program funding, specifically for non-deployment funding. So this policy notice will include that states with erroneous AI laws will be ineligible for non-deployment funds. So that's the reason why the governor's AI proposal is relevant. Now, while the proposal does seem to be in line with the executive order, it will depend on the federal interpretation on the state AI laws and the potential that it might restrict non-deployment funding. Paul, Jacob, do you want to add anything to that subject before we move on to other things?
No, unless anybody's got any questions on that. I think you covered it pretty well. Again, the governor's recommendations are in line with the executive order at this juncture, but nobody knows what's going to be in the mind of the task force that's going to be reviewing these things. So we'll just keep an eye on it. Brandon does a very good job of making sure that we understand what's happening at the federal level. So we'll keep up with.
Philip, you have a question?
Yeah, so I want to add to this, if it's okay to just raise the issue that I raised in an email, if that's okay at this point in time, a related issue, Brandon. And it's great to hear, we have the AI law out there. We want to see AI out there. We want to see smart cars. The need for AI is deep into the network is necessary, but getting that AI deep into the network requires extremely, having great bandwidth and having fiber. Really, if you have fiber, it really it's able to provide that bandwidth that AI needs to have the smart cars and all the end user services that folks require. So this is why it goes hand in hand with BEAD, and that we want to see fiber be put into the network as far as possible and wherever possible. That way we have a smarter network and we can use AI to benefit society, benefit everyone. Smart cars from soup to nuts, everything you could think of. But if you don't have that capacity, you don't have that fiber built deep into the network, it's gonna constrain the ability to use AI. Now, let's talk about that. I did talk about BEAD earlier. I talked about how it impacted our locations in Marion County. But before we were given this announcement, one of the things that Talkie, the client I represent, and we experienced was with the developers who actually are in various communities who are actually owners of the wireless provider within a community. And they have exclusive access to the easements. They provide monopoly service to their residents, and they will not let anybody in. So Talkie, for instance, had locations in various locations on the outskirts of various communities, and the community's developer refused to even want to talk to us. Basically showed us the door, threw us to the sidewalk because they're like, hey, you're not welcome here. Despite the fact that you want to provide fiber, we're offering this wireless service that's 300 down, 550 up. We want to offer 10 gig up and down to every residential location if they want. We have our regular offering goes from 500 to 1 gig to 2.5 gig to 5 gig. And I mean, other providers that may be on this call are providing similar services, maybe not as much as 10 gig to the home, but Talkie is. And so the big problem here with Florida is that these developers have tied up their communities. So the residents that live in these communities are unable to get the high-speed broadband services from other competitor providers because they're locked into using their developer's wireless provider, which provides subpar service. I would say subpar because 300 down, 50 up, that may be good for a rural area, but in a more dense community, you should be getting the best possible service, and that should be up to 10 gig right now, and 10 gig down and 10 gig up if you wanted it. So there's a need for legislation, Brandon. There's a need for legislation, okay, to prevent the developers from maintaining exclusivity over these areas. Now, if there was a fiber provide, if it was a a service provider that was doing that, they're not allowed to um, execute and enforce their provisions of any exclusivity under FCC rules. But the thing is, the developer is tied to the broadband provider, so it doesn't matter. They're not going to let anybody in. They're not going to let anybody access the easements. They're not going to let the homeowners do it unless it's turned over. And then you have to look at the provisions of the developer's contract and the HOA to see if there's any flexibility out there.
If you
because
don't
they have it all
mind,
tied
let me
up.
go ahead and interrupt real quick. I understand the concern. It's just that right now the Office of Broadband can't really push the policies, but I understand that there is a policy within the state legislature right now, HB 657, which is one that you mentioned in the email, and one that the Office of Broadband is monitoring at the moment. And we understand your concern, and we're right there with you.
So can we construct legislation as a group to prohibit any monopoly or exclusive arrangements by the developer and their wireless provider? Put that before the legislature as a companion bill to 657?
So in terms of like lobbying for legislation, that's not necessarily, I think, what we were looking for from the LTPTs. If you have a thought,
I disagree, because this goes to their constituents. Their constituents, the LTP, is represented by each of the counties, and their constituents are living in these HOAs that are subject to these exclusivity arrangements, and they can't get access to high-speed broadbands because the developer, shuts them out, and the developer's services are subpar relative to what they deserve in a more densely populated communities. And so it's not like they're in total rural areas. They're in pretty dense areas, and so this is huge to the LTPT. Now, LTPT hasn't been around long enough to have has substantial impact, but now that it's together, there's 180 people on this email list. The developers have had exclusive control with the legislatures. It's hard to move anything because of these developers. But now that we have LTPT, we have assembled a mass of people that can make this issue and drive it to ensure that other competitors are able to provide high-speed broadband services within these communities that are otherwise locked up by the developers.
Yes, sir. And I understand what you're saying. We really sort of envision them on a local level as an individual sort of entity, county by county, to be able to help us get our message out and to help us understand their situation on the ground. So you can look at the statute and see sort of how they were designed and how they were built up, and they obviously have relationships with their legislatures, like you said, these are county officials. So, if you want to discuss these issues, we see this on the ground. We see, HOAs not being receptive to new development, things like that. I think on an individual level, they can, go to their legislators in that way. But I think as a collective, I think, the idea for this call is to make sure that everyone knows what is going on at our level, to make sure that we understand generally what people are hearing on the ground. But, I think from our perspective, we're not necessarily looking to get everyone together, go to the Capitol and say, this is what we need. We'll leave that to the individual communities.
I understand it, but I respectfully disagree, because if we're trying to provide the high-speed broadband services that the constituents of Florida deserve, we have assembled this group, and we have to look at the real-world issues that are out there in the trenches. Regardless of what BEAD says and the location that it wants to deploy, if you have to go through the gates of a developer, you're not going to get in. Even though the broadband office wants you to deploy fiber, if the developer doesn't want you in and you don't have access to easements, you're not getting in. So this is an issue to LTPT to ensure that fiber gets deployed robustly in Florida. And it's necessary in order to spur economic initiatives and everything else. With AI, you need fiber. And this is the problem. You're not going to get it if we allow these developers to maintain exclusive monopoly control of the residential communities that they're associated with. So now's the time for this group to perhaps look at these things and be a little bit, broad-minded, and look at this from a 30,000-foot level and say, listen, how can we best protect Florida and its residents, its constituents in the state from these types of actions by the developers? And that's why I call this something that could be a companion to HB 657, because it's a serious issue that's impacting them and everyone in Florida.
Thank you, Phil.
Okay, so let's go ahead, since we're on the topic of state legislation. Oh, David, you got a question?
Yeah, Philip, I can appreciate your passion. A number of us at the local level get those kind of calls relatively frequently. Of, hey, my HOA and my builders have defined what is available for me. What we have historically seen, and I know this is true for Polk County and probably for the rest, most of that is controlled contractually between the developers and the purchasers of the original purchasers of that property. We have worked very diligently, and I think everyone who perhaps even has some influence within this group, with our building and codes groups to really push and make sure that the easements are open and that there's a full right of way. But once you get inside some of those gates, there is no control for us nor for us to actually influence. We can push, we can prod, we continue to ask, but the body and the way that this team was formed is not necessarily to that. I mean, back to, I think Jacob did a nice job, or Brandon, of explaining that that's our push and our ongoing piece, is that we engage and influence, but we really, as far as a body, don't have legislative clout or abilities. Each of us have our own counties and our own responsibilities, and there are legislative priorities that are held within that arena. I appreciate the passion, and dude, I get it. I get probably one or two of those calls a month.
Yeah.
And I would love to be able to say, hey, neighborhood B, you need to open your gates and let these people have better access. But contractually and legally, we don't have a leg to stand on.
So that's what
And
that's what the FCC
and the legislature seems very cautious about changing that.
Okay, so let me just talk about the FCC addressed this for service providers that they can't implement or impose exclusivity requirements that they have with these developers with gated communities. Okay, and what I'm saying is that if Florida did the same thing for developers, then we would have these two things marriage, right? And we would have the opportunity for other competitors to come in. Okay, so if it can be done at the
Phil,
FCC level,
just to jump in real quick, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time. I understand what you're saying. We still have a couple more state legislative updates we want to get to for Brandon. We want to make sure that we have the other teams have the opportunity to share some information with each other if they want to do that in the second half of the call. So, like I said, appreciate the conversation. Like I said, just want to make sure that we stay on track here.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up right now, but there is an opportunity here to address this issue. I understand it's in contracts. That's why I raised it, because it is in contracts. And what you have to do is just say prohibit that because it's against public policy, have these types of exclusive arrangements. That could be a legislative fix. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Okay, so thank you for the discussion. So let's move on to Senate Bill 250. So it's championed by Senator Simon, and kind of pushed by President Albritton. It reflects last year's 110 Rural Renaissance Bill. So it's a big one on our item of monitoring. So basically what it does is creates the Office of Rural Prosperity within the Department of Commerce. And this office will administer 7 different rural community liaison centers, in which the Office of Broadband and LTPT teams will have to coordinate with them. The Office of Broadband will also have to provide additional reporting for rural, unserved, and underserved communities. But in regards to that, is there any questions on SB 250?
I did want to jump in on that just because the LTPTs are explicitly written into that bill in the rural areas. So I just wanted to make you guys aware, if you're in a rural area, your LTPT might be asked to help out with the rural liaison effort that they're working on there. So like I said, just FYI, just wanted to flag that for you.
So that is the reason why it's a big piece of legislation that we are monitoring. Of course, the reason the bill didn't pass last year was because it was a lot of back and forth between the House and the Florida Senate. So we don't fully know if it's going to pass this year, but there is a lot of push on the Senate side to get this bill through. But we'll see where it goes, and if it does pass and sign into law, we will inform you all on what we might need to do on the next steps. But if there's no further questions or concerns regarding state legislation, we can move on to federal. So Congress in recent months has been considering 7 pieces of legislation that would streamline permitting for federal lands and as well as address railroad right-of-way issues that we are having. These items are still in the U.S. House and could take months before they pass the House, all voted on in the Senate and eventually signed to the law by the president. And that's if there is enough push to get them through the finish line. So they're still in the House. There's still a long way to go, and it could potentially take months. So we'll see. But like I said, if these pieces do pass, we'll inform you all on the next steps. But that's all I had for policy and legislation updates. So if there's anything else that I missed, Paul, Jacob, you can add now.
Like you're good, Brandon.
All right, thank you. I pass it back to Elizabeth.
Alrighty, well, if nobody has any further questions regarding B deployment or the legislative update, thank you, Brandon, for that. We will go ahead and move it over to the LTPT only section of the call. So I'm going to ask all those who are not LTPTs to go ahead and step off. Thank you so much for joining. We hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas. Happy holidays. Enjoy the break.
Thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to speak. Everyone have a great holiday. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Do the same.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too, Phil.
Alrighty, well, I think mostly everybody that stepped off is gone. Matt, do you want to go ahead and start us off?
Sure, yeah. Matt Creedle, Marion County LTPT lead. And I've been working with Phil for a couple weeks now since this came out. And I know Elizabeth and Jacob, we've looped you in on some emails. And I've made sure to say that for whatever it's worth, I do want to give Talkie and Phil credit. They joined our LTPT early. They have been a very active member. They've been very engaged. They didn't just show up out of nowhere after the awards or anything. So I will credit them with that. And I don't want to jeopardize too much of the conversation because we spent a lot of time on it. But I do think from an LTPT perspective, I would tend to agree with David. There's no mechanism for that. We can't regulate at the county level, and that's where Phil, you hear he disagrees. But I try to reiterate, we have no teeth to do anything. We can't regulate the HOAs. We can't get in there if we can't access the easement. And so are there fixes? Yeah. Will it get Talkie those locations like next month? No, I don't think it will. And so I think it was kind of to Jacob's point then, what do we see as the mission of the LTPT and the Office of Broadband? So just wanted to add some more context to that. And I definitely understand. I think, Phil, it's a rough spot. I definitely agree with a lot of his points, but it's where we are.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. And yeah, we ultimately I think that the LTPTs should be what is most beneficial for y'all and for your communities. And I think if we find that they are not working for you guys, or like, I need to do X, but I can't do it because the statute doesn't work that way, or we don't have the teeth, or, we need to be legally constituted as an actual board or have bylaws or whatever, let us know if there's something we can do, if there's something we can adjust. Like I said, if it's not meeting your needs, because that's ultimately what the teams have to be, is for you guys. It has to be productive, and it has to, allow for you guys to actually make a difference, and for us to be able to assist with that. So like I said, if there is a change that you think might be beneficial, or something we can do to move us forward, if you feel like there's something I can't do that I need to be able to do, let us know, like I said, and we can work and try and sort of adjust.
Yeah, and I did have, and this kind of to the legislative aspect of it, because with my day job being the legislative manager, I think I may have mentioned this, but I understood the constraints of proposed legislation out of the Office of Broadband. It's just more for a conversation. One of the issues, and David talked about the amount of calls that we get. I'm sure y'all get these calls too, where a subcontractor in a white truck with no marking showed up and dug somebody's yard up, and the homeowner has no idea who they are, and the sub can be there. They're allowed to be there. They're not doing anything wrong, but it's just unnerving for homeowners, especially in rural areas in Marion County, when dudes in white trucks show up and start digging in your yard. So one of the things that I thought is, can we look at potentially a legislative fix for subcontractors needing to identify themselves on their vest or whatever it is when they're out there working? And I don't want to push that, but I think it is a conversation to have if we're talking about legislative fixes for things.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think a lot of the subcontractors that the service providers work with are like smaller local guys, and it's sort of started out of some guy's garage, and they just show up in their pickup truck, and like you said, they don't have the branding maybe, and they don't have because they just sort of started a little small business to do some little work on the side or whatever, and it morphed into something more. And like you said, to your point, it can get to something unclear about who works for who's doing what, are you allowed to be here, where are your permits, etc. So yes, and I know that, like you said in the past, you've mentioned that one before. So I do think that one is a good conversation to have.
And that's really all I got. I appreciate these. I can, off the top of my head, I can't think of any wholesale changes that the LTPT needs to undergo. Marion, I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on the limits of what we can do and how we can affect the change. And so if I think of any, I'll definitely let the group know. But for right now, yeah, there's always little tweaks that can be made, but I think whole hog we're where we need to be.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you, Matt, for bringing that up and also adding more context to the previous conversation. I mean, even if it's not a legislative update that you guys are push that's being brought up within the LGBTs, we appreciate you bringing up some of the issues that you're seeing, if it's with an ISP or something else just related to broadband, obviously because we work so closely with the ISP. So that's something that we can raise to them. Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, just to make a comment about what they identify themselves. That may be something that we can address in our agreements. We could say when you go into a property and make sure you have proper identification. That nature.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Something that we can have a conversation with you about if you wanted to have some recommendations. I'm not sure we can mandate that they wear a specific shirt or anything, but certainly have a sign that they can post to say, we are working in this particular project that's funded by the state of Florida, so that they know what's going on. Those are minor tweaks, as long as it's not going to be a huge problem for the providers. I don't think they would have any issue with that. So if you want to provide some information to Elizabeth, Brandon, or Jacob, I'd certainly be willing to talk to our attorneys about that in our agreements for all providers.
Perfect. Yeah. And for the record, so I have seen a company that does it. MetroNet came into Marion County about, I want to say, a year or so ago, and their subs did that. Their subs had big old bright vests on. It said subcontractor for MetroNet service provider. And I was like, okay, there we go. So I could see the contrast. So yeah, I'll make sure I don't want to jeopardize too much time. Marion County's had a lot of airtime in this meeting. And so I'll make sure I get with Brandon and Elizabeth and Jacob on some of that. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks again, Matt. Kyle, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just was going to share with you, kind of related.
From FCC?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Beatrice.
Oh, go ahead, Kyle.
Okay, sorry. I just was going to share with Paul and you guys in the neighboring county, we had some folks who just went in an unmarked truck or whatever, put on vests in the right of way and started pulling up fiber to sell the copper. So they were pulling up fiber that AT&T had put down in the middle of the daytime. So, I mean, I think some credentialing or some identification like that really might call some attention to that. I think the fiber that was installed had a way to report itself, like for disturbances. And so I think that's ultimately how they were caught. But it was kind of a surprise to me that people had the nerve to just go out there and start pulling up new fiber that was, recently laid down. But I guess I guess they just felt like because there's so many unmarked activities like that that no one would notice. It was the fiber that reported it. So that's a little bit of a one-off, but there could be some net losses if we're not kind of careful or working together as a community like that. So just wanted to share.
Yeah, that's
About
interesting.
$18,000 worth of fiber that they pulled up before they got caught.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of the networking stuff is all virtual, and the providers can keep track of a lot of the fiber in real time, and so when there's a cut, they can know pretty quickly. So I would assume that they got there pretty fast, but that's yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks again, Kyle. And like Paul said, if there's something internally that we can do to address these, that's certainly something we're going to look into. So thank you guys for bringing that up. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, things that they'd like to share?
I will. I'll just jump in and say one of the elements of the executive order was that we should be getting some BEAD non-deployment guidance in 90 days. So I do want to put that on your radar. We should be hearing pretty soon. I know. I feel like we always are saying we're waiting on the federal government. We'll let you know when we hear. So hopefully that gets the clock ticking on that, and we can move forward. With non-deployment. So like I said, just wanted to flag that for you guys. Hopefully we can get some good news on that soon.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I will say it's definitely on our Christmas list. Kyle, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now, we've been reading about the Rural Health Transformation Program included in the big, beautiful bill with, and there's a priority. Florida's application looks like it will be awarded soon. And it looks like they'll break up rural counties into, I think, 7 regions to try to increase access to healthcare. And so I just wonder if maybe if there is not some sort of, you know, incentive to further that coordination with broadband installation, to enable some of those things. We're going to just convene some meetings in January to try to stay ahead of the application process. Is the Office of Broadband watching that as well?
So
That Rural Health Transformation Program?
That's not something I was familiar with. If you could give us some more information on that, that would be helpful. I know through our capital projects fund programs, we were concerned with telehealth, and I know that that's a big, something that broadband can really help enable. So I definitely think we'd be interested in that. If you could send us some information on it so we can get caught up, that would be
yeah, and I'll just type into the just a quick reference into the chat for others to kind of look at it. Sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle.
Anybody else have anything?
I see Melissa said in chat that it's through ACA rather than Florida Commerce, but it would be good to know about regardless. And if there's anything we can do, any connection we can make or whatever, like I said, would be happy to help.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is thinking about is maybe some sort of coordination between the two types of funding across these regional these regional networks, I guess, and if then the legislature passes those rural initiatives, I could see the LTPTs becoming a somewhat influential with regard to overall coordination to strengthen the applications to ACA for funding to maybe fill in some of the gaps. So I absolutely want to see the changes in the locations between the two fabric maps as soon as possible, because it looks to me like there may be, I want to look for coordination possibilities there.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we will we'll work on that. Peter?
Hi, Jacob. You guys are doing a great job. Certainly a lot of craziness out there, but permitting is one of the areas that the NTIA has mentioned publicly. Is that something that we can discuss on the next call, what that might look like in terms of Florida's goals for permitting reform? If that's something you guys have been contemplating?
Yeah, we can we can talk about that. I know that we have some federal stuff, like you said, they've been considering. It mostly deals with federal lands for permitting reform. But yes, we can talk about permitting. And I know that from a local government perspective, that there's a little bit of a dance in terms of the service providers and the local government's role in the permitting process. So yeah, would be happy to discuss further and in more detail on next month's call.
Thanks. There's some, basics like bonding and timeframes and that sort of thing. So if we can maybe just kind of frame that out, even what would be up, for discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. We'd be happy to address that. And I will say also, Josh, he is our head of GIS. He stuck a link in the chat. It's for a survey. It's super quick, just on the Broadband Hub. So for all of you that have access to that, where our maps are, if you want to complete that survey, feel free to give us some feedback. So we're always looking for, ways to improve it. We'd really appreciate it. Alrighty, anybody else? Anything else that wants to be discussed? Alrighty, well, thank you all for joining the call today. I hope you all have a happy holidays and get a little bit of a break.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you very
Jean.
much.
You did
We
a great
appreciate
job.
Thanks,
you.
You
everyone.
deserve a break as well.
Take care.
Thank
Especially
you.
before the
everyone.
legislative session.
Yeah.
Have a great one. Thank
You
you.
too,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.